Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are done with Week 7 of the high school football season. Week 8 is around the corner. We are headed down the home stretch. Everyone is playing district games. Things are heating up in terms of playoff races, and we will recap it all and look ahead in another exciting edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have some interesting results. We have some unexpected results. We have all sorts of results that are going to affect how things play out here over the final couple of weeks. And I am excited to get going. And as we always do, we will go from the top to the bottom, from 5A down to 2A. And we will start with the Sherman Bearcats, who host Frisco Reedy in a District 6 5A Division I contest. 7 o'clock. Remember to note that start time. 7 o'clock on Friday at Bearcat Stadium. Frisco Reedy comes in 7-0 and 5-0 in district play. They won last week 55-29 against Frisco Lebanon Trail, while Sherman is 2-4 and 1-3 overall. They lost 13-6 against Frisco Heritage. And we talked about going into that game against Heritage, part of this string of first place teams that are still undefeated in district play. And the Bearcats were coming off a lopsided loss, the first game that had gotten away from them. They had been playing these close games, and here was another one, and another one that they may look back at the end and say, this is one of those games. This could be a swing game. This is what hurt us is we played these close games and we weren't able to get the job done. Down 10-0 at halftime. Score in the third quarter on a 52-yard touchdown pass from Caleb Orr to Vontrell Sanders to get within that 10-6 score, but that would be the only touchdown, the only points for the Bearcats. Heritage added a field goal to make it 13-6, so if Sherman were to get a touchdown, they would either tie or potentially have to go for two to win the game. But the offense was not there, and so we have another game here where, much like that Centennial game that was 14-6 or 14-7, come down to the wire, and Sherman is unable to come out on the winning side of it in a defensive battle. So now we talked last week going into this game. They were tied for fourth place. Now they are in sixth place. If they would have won, they would have stayed in. They would have been in a three-way tie, staying with Wakeland and Lone Star. Now Reedy at the top, tied with Heritage in first place at 5-0. Frisco was also undefeated at 4-0. You have Wakeland and Lone Star, who are both 2-2, and then Sherman is 1-3, ahead of Centennial, Lebanon Trail, and Liberty at the bottom. And so the non-terrible news is Wakeland and Lone Star still on the schedule, so you have a chance to potentially still control your destiny for the fourth spot. I think at this point, everybody is playing for the fourth spot because you already have the top three teams have officially established themselves as we head into the final couple weeks. They've beaten everybody below them, so they're going to have tiebreakers there. And you look at the schedule this week, Frisco and Heritage are going to play each other. So obviously somebody in that trio is going to get their first loss. And then, of course, you have Reedy playing Sherman, so that's a chance for Reedy to stay undefeated there. And so I think it's right now you have the battle for fourth place. Sherman is still in that mix. They've got to find a way to win these games. And Wakeland and Lone Star are the definite must-have, so you have potential tiebreakers over them as well. But obviously, it was good to see Sherman bounce back, at least from a defensive standpoint. That game against Frisco obviously did not go well. And here's a game where they got back to having a game in the fourth quarter be close. Unfortunately, they were unable to make the plays down the stretch. Caleb Thompson led the way in rushing, 10 carries for 30 yards. Orr was 16 of 21 passing for 122 yards. Sanders, 5 catches for 95 yards. Colby Ray Short, 4 catches for 35 yards. Phoenix Grant did a little bit of everything in this game. Saw a lot more time on defense. Was 4 of 8 passing for 50 yards. Ran 5 times for 27 yards. Caught 4 passes. So he was kind of all over the place. Going to be interesting to see if that's the plan going forward. that perhaps, or who looked good at the end of the Frisco game, that last quarter and plus, and obviously, very accurate in this one, 16-21. If maybe that's the plan, potentially going forward, to use Grant more on defense and let him do a little more than just be at the quarterback spot, move him around to some spots and get the ball to him that way. And Frisco Reedy's tough. They're undefeated. They're ranked in the top 10 in the state. I've seen them once already against Denison. They've got speed. They've got a receiver that's going to Texas Tech. They have one of the best offensive linemen in the country who's a junior for the junior class. They can put up points. They will put up points, and they've shown that so far throughout the season. And I think at this point, obviously, they think they're the cream of the crop in this district. They're undefeated. They're looking at a potential undefeated season after Sherman. Just looking at the schedule for them coming up, they end with the bye, so they only have the 3 games left. And they play. Just looking at the schedule, they play Heritage, they play Frisco, and they play Sherman. So maybe if you're a Sherman Bearcat fan and you want to be hopeful, they're looking ahead because next week they play Frisco, and then the week after that they play Heritage. So maybe they think they can just come up here, get a win, and just by showing up. To give an example of a potential situation, fans that went to the Highland Park Sherman game last year, obviously Highland Park, traditional perennial program, always good, was the favorite in that district. I don't know if they were undefeated. They at least had one loss when they came to Sherman, and the Bearcats played them tough. And a lot of people didn't expect that. It was a close game, going into the third quarter, before Highland Park was able to pull away. Maybe you get that with Frisco Reedy. I mean, obviously, no offense to, Lebanon Trail scored 29 points on them. Obviously, it didn't mean a lot, but Lebanon Trail has struggled to score on a lot of people. And I think because of what I've seen of them, they're very good at stopping the run. And I think if you're Sherman, you're going to attack with the pass, and you have guys in the passing game that might be able to take advantage of that. If you're not going to, if you're not a run-heavy team like Denison was, if that doesn't work, then you're sort of in trouble. But I think I would be interested to see what the coaches saw this last week with how Lebanon Trail got that 29 points, because Lebanon Trail has not scored points on anybody for the most part. So they've only scored 78 points in 6 games, and 29 of that came against Frisco Reedy. So that's obviously an interesting thing there. So if you're Sherman, maybe you can try to pull an upset here. Obviously, I think a lot of people going into last week, you have Frisco Heritage. They're 5-1. They're still perfect in district. They're tied for first place. I don't know how many people thought that Sherman would be, down 4 points in the third quarter. I think, and going on the road, holding, they held Heritage to barely 150 yards of offense. So that's obviously showing that they can compete with the teams in this district, and maybe Reedy's one of those ones that they can hang tough for a little bit and maybe pull an upset. But at the very least, if you want to look ahead and feel, what do they have to do to make the playoffs? You're probably going to have to win your last 3 games, because those are going to be against, or your last 4 games, because they're going to be against Liberty, who's winless, and it's probably going to be winless when you play them in the last week of the season. But you're going to have Lakeland, and you're going to have Lone Star, so you got to win those games to have tiebreakers, potentially for 4th place. So going to be it's one of those deals that the way the schedule worked out, you had those games before your bye, then you had this 3 in a row against the top teams, and then you have back-to-back against teams that you're going to be competing against for that playoff spot, and then potentially facing an 0-9 team the last week of the season to end the year. So we'll see what Sherman can do when they host Reedy. 7 o'clock at Bearcat Stadium on Friday night. Another team searching for a win to stay in that playoff race is the Denison Yellow Jackets over in District 7-5A Division 2. They'll be making a short trip down 75 to visit Melissa. Denison is 3-3 and 1-2 after they lost 55-30 against Terrell, and Melissa is 4-2, 3-0. They won 42-10 against Mesquite Poteet. To recap Denison's game last week, a lot of points by the offense, by the opposing team for the second straight week. Split with that bye in the middle. Denison loses to Lovejoy 51-7. Go into the bye, try to regroup, and after the first quarter, it's only 7-0. Things are looking pretty good. It seemed like it was a competitive game. And then even at halftime, it's 21-14. Denison's down, but again, it's only a touchdown. It's only a one possession game. And then things got away from Denison in the second half. A lot like the Liberty game, which was 21-0 at halftime, and against Liberty, that's pretty good. Then they beat Princeton this last week 70-0. It probably could have been worse. But basically, the bad thing with Denison right now has been the defense. They basically Lovejoy did not punt scored on every possession until the very last one when they were running out the clock. And sort of the similar story this week. Terrell had 10 possessions. They scored on 8 of them. One that they didn't, they got with 3 seconds before the half at their 30-yard line. They threw an incomplete pass, and that was it. And then at the end of the game, when they knelt down to secure the win, they scored touchdowns on every other possession. And so that's been the biggest thing, is that if you can't stop people, you either got to match them or you got to get one more possession to outscore them. And Denison put up 30 points in this game. They had almost 500 yards of offense. They ran for 216 yards, and then Josh Kurtenbach was 20 of 32 passing for 273 yards. Jack Allman had 4 catches, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also ran 18 times for 93 yards. Kurtenbach also had 14 carries for 71 yards on a touchdown. Grant Yerkes had a touchdown run, and so they were moving the ball. They were putting up points. It was just that they were unable to get, they did not force a punt for the second straight game in a row. Couldn't get them off the field. I know the wing tee is tough. They did have some chances. They just couldn't get that done. So now you're playing a Melissa team. Again, that's pretty good. Has some recruitable athletes. They've been building up that program, over the last 10 years, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they're in 5A. This is their first year in 5A. They've obviously adjusted well. Them and Lovejoy are the only teams that are undefeated in district. They play the last week, and the way things are going, that's looking like going to be for the district championship, but the loser is going to get second place. Crandall is sitting in third place at 2-1, and then there's this gaggle where Denison is. You have Denison, Greenville, Poteet, and Terrell are all 1-2. Princeton is 0-3, so I think we can kind of sort of take them out of the mix. But if you're Denison, you've got a win over Greenville, you've got a loss to Terrell, you've got Mesquite Poteet coming up, you've also got Crandall coming up. So again, much like Sherman, the people that you need to beat are in your way, and potentially this week is not a must-win. I think the last 3 games are must-wins, because you're talking about Crandall, you're talking about Princeton, and you're talking about Mesquite Poteet. Obviously, you need to beat Princeton because everybody else is beating Princeton. You need to beat Mesquite Poteet because that could be a potential tiebreaker. And you probably don't need to beat Crandall, but if you beat Crandall, you're in a really good spot because right now nobody else has beaten Crandall, and you don't want to finish in a tie for 4th with Terrell because obviously they'll have the tiebreaker and they will get the final playoff spot. So if you can get a win this week, that would be great. And that would help tremendously, but I don't know just the way things are going defensively if they could handle Melissa. Obviously, Melissa's got 2 losses. One of them is to Argyle, who is top ranked in 5A Division II, and they lost to China Spring, who is always a state championship contender. They lost that game by a point, and then they lost to let me see if I can find that Argyle score. That was 37-18. So you could be looking at they've only got the one loss, and that would be to the number 1 ranked team in 5A Division 2. But so far in district, they've handled their business. They beat Crandall. That's Crandall's only district loss. They beat them 50-22. Then they beat Terrell 56-21. So if you want to play that fun comparative game, and then like we said last week, they won 42-10. So they've had 3 district games. None of them have been close. So we'll see what Denison has this week. I think the biggest thing, like I said, you want to see a better defensive showing, just to kind of get some confidence going. Because like we said, next week, they will be going on the road. They host Princeton, and then they go on the road the next week at Crandall, and then they host Petit to end. So the final 3 games, you've got 2 of them at home, and so you want to try to get things back in order on defense to kind of make this stretch run, and be in the mix when we get to that last week for sure. So we'll see what Denison has when they go down to Melissa on Friday night in 7-5A Division 2 play. In 4A, District 5 4A Division 2, the Van Alstyne Panthers hit the road and go to Farmersville. Van Alstyne is 3-4 and 2-1 after they lost last week, 35-14 against Aubrey. Farmersville is 2-4 and 0-2 after they lost 20-7 against Gainesville. So we talked about with Van Alstyne, they were playing Aubrey. Winner was going to be alone in first place. So obviously Aubrey is 3-0 atop the standings, and Van Alstyne is tied with Gainesville, 2-1 in second place, and Bridgeport is 1-1 because they've already had their district bye. So the way things are shaking up right now, those are the top 4 teams. Sanger's at 1-2, and Farmersville and Crum are at 0-2. The good thing, if you are Van Alstyne, 1, you have the tiebreaker over Sanger, and 2, you have a tiebreaker over Crum. And if you win this week, you have the tiebreaker over Farmersville. And unless something crazy happens, I'd have to check the math, and I don't do that until the results actually come in on Thursday and Friday nights, depending on what district you're in. There's a decent chance that Van Alstyne's going to clinch a playoff spot if they win this week. I'm gonna have to double check that math, but that is potentially something that's on the table, because they will have the tiebreaker over the last 3, and then the only thing I've got to check is if potentially there's a 3-way tie involving Bridgeport along the way, that could be for that 4th spot. So, but Van Alstyne's still in a good spot after last week, even though they didn't come out with the win. To recap that one, Weston Johnson had 6 carries for 46 yards. Jaden Mahan had 16 carries, 45 yards, and a touchdown. Jackson Allen added a touchdown run. And I think, to hold Aubrey to 35 points is pretty good. I don't know if they're not as explosive as they were in the past. But I think that's a decent number. The big thing obviously for Van Alstyne this one was they had trouble getting the offense going. And that's kind of expected against Aubrey. I think obviously they were probably picked as the favorite in this district. And so now your best bet is to get second place. Obviously the big game against Gainesville that's coming up, that's obviously going to be important. That's going to be the last game of the season because, again, Van Alstyne has the last bye. So they play this week against Farmersville. They're going to host Bridgeport next week in a key game. And then they're going to go to Gainesville to finish their portion of the schedule. So they should know before the last week how they should be locked into wherever they are. And obviously if they win out, they're at least second place. And if Aubrey somehow gets upset along the way, they could potentially share the district championship. But they're in position to get second place. Farmersville has struggled. They lost to Gainesville last week, like we said, 20-7. Gainesville has surprised people so far. They came into district play without a win. They were 0-4, and they've gone 2-1 in district. So that's sort of been a little bit of a surprise. And like I said, so Farmersville lost to Bridgeport 42-21, and then they lost to Gainesville last week. And Gainesville is playing Bridgeport this week, so you have two key games there. Aubrey's playing Crum. Obviously, Aubrey's a huge favorite there, and Sanger has the bye. So the other two games in this district are really sort of swing games. If you're Farmersville and you want to stay alive, you've gotta find a way to win this game. And then Gainesville and Bridgeport is at the very least potentially for seeding. So we'll see if Van Alstyne can bounce back. They won the two games. They were relatively close at points in the fourth quarter. They were able to hang on against Crum. They were able to pull away against Sanger. And now the question is, what can they do against Farmersville when they go down there on Friday in District 5 for a Division II action? Of note, I will say this too, because we have this in a couple games this week for whatever reason. Even though they weren't in the same district last year, this was a non-district game, and Van Alstyne won 41-18. So for whatever that's worth, and Van Alstyne's won 13 of the last 14 meetings, for whatever that's worth. So maybe those numbers suggest a good thing for Van Alstyne coming up on Friday night. Moving down to the 3A ranks, tons of games here, and a lot of really good games. If you're a 3A fan around here this week, there's some big ones going on in the area. And to start it off, we'll go to District 4-3A, Division 1. We have the Whitesboro Bearcats going out to play Brock. Whitesboro is 6-0 and 3-0 in district play. For they won last week 61-13 against Peaster. And Brock did not play. They had the district bye. And they are 2-4 and 2-0. And obviously, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that we've been talking about Brock because obviously they played Gunner. So we had them top of mind for that game. And we talked about how they've played the super tough schedule, Gunner being one of those teams. They played Gunner really close at their place. And then they got into district play, and they haven't lost since. To touch on who that they've played, they opened with Boyd. And this actually, if you want to play the comparison game, we can do that because Brock beat Boyd 55-6, and then Brock beat Peaster 49-14, and Whitesboro beat Boyd 43-8, and then Whitesboro beat Peaster this last week 61-13. So if you want to play that comparative score game, we can do that. Obviously, Brock's coming off a bye, so they're rested. If they had injuries, they're probably they got that gap at a right time to face what I think people look at as the top two teams in the district. Yes, Paradise is undefeated. They are also 3-0, and they're actually 7-0 overall. But obviously, I think if you were to rank those three in order, I think people have Brock as the 1, Whitesboro as the 2, and Paradise as the 3, and they'll all play each other here in the next coming weeks, so we'll know for sure. But three teams have obviously dominated the early going. Whitesboro and Paradise are 3-0, Brock is 2-0, Pilot Point is 1-2, and then everybody else does not have a win. Peaster, Ponder 0-2, Boyd is 0-3. So that obviously looks like the 4 playoff teams. The top 3 for sure are rock solid and on their way to clinching a spot. The obviously question is, can somebody come up and get Pilot Point and maybe have a tiebreaker over them for 4th place? But Whitesboro overcame a slow start last week. It was only 6-6 after the first quarter. By halftime, it was 27-6, and then in the second half, Whitesboro started to pull away to get to that 61-13 score. Leading the way, usual cast of characters when you're talking about Whitesboro. Grayson Ledbetter, 18 carries, 267 yards, couple touchdowns. Mac Harper, not a huge game in the passing attack. 10 of 19 for 167 yards. Did have a touchdown pass. Ran 9 times for 53 yards and 3 touchdown runs. Max Parker added a touchdown run. He had 6 carries for 76 yards. Leading the way on the receivers, Jay Sanders, 3 catches, 95 yards, and he had the touchdown catch. And Isaiah Chappell, normally known for his defense, work in the trenches, he stepped in the fullback role and got a couple of touchdown runs around the goal line to really break this game open for Whitesboro after that slow start. So Whitesboro 6-0 for the first. They match. It matches the school record for starts. They've never been 7-0, so they're trying to do that. Obviously, it's not the opponent that you want to see These guys, obviously, this is the third time that they've played in less than a year. Obviously, they played in district last year. Brock won. Then they both made it to the region finals / state quarterfinals, which was the best, deepest run in Whitesboro history. And Brock won that one on the way to being the state runner-up. And so now here we are again in district play. I don't know. I don't know if Whitesboro's never beaten Brock. Brock is 5-0 against Whitesboro. The games have not really been close. The last couple times out, the region final was a 49-14 score. But this Whitesboro team, like I said, they're undefeated. There hasn't been, they've got wins over really good teams. They've played some close games and they've come out on top. They've blasted some teams that you would expect them to do that against. And so I don't know if this Brock team is as good as they've had in the past, but this is obviously a great measuring stick. And we know from what happened last year, no matter who wins, you're probably going on the opposite side of the bracket. So would it be great to be on to be a district champion and go undefeated and do these things for Whitesboro? Yes, but you have a veteran group over there that knows we lost to Brock last year, and that side of the bracket we were able to get through relatively easy to get to the state quarterfinals. And if Brock is waiting there again, so be it. So this isn't the end of the world. If whoever loses this game, you still have to beat a Paradise team that thinks they're pretty good to take care of business there. But obviously this is a huge game. This is the number one game in this district just because nobody else has really, besides Paradise, has done a whole lot. And Paradise is playing Peaster this week, so you assume they're going to win. So obviously the winner of Whitesboro Brock and Paradise are probably going to be the two undefeateds. And like we mentioned, after this week, next week, Brock plays Paradise while Whitesboro's on their bye. So we'll know about that. And then as soon as Whitesboro comes out of their bye, they play Paradise. So we'll know going into the last week where people stand, and that'll probably be the potential finality of the top three. Paradise has a bye to end, so their last game of the season is against Whitesboro, so that's going to be obviously huge for them because they'll know for sure there if they win, they'll probably get either the second or the third seed depending on what they do against Brock. So huge game there in District 4-3A Division 1. Another huge game as we shift over to 5-3A Division 1. Pottsboro Cardinals hosting Winsboro. This is another prime matchup in terms of seeding and the district championship and all that sort of stuff. You have Winsboro, who's 6-0 and 3-0. They won 28-14 against Mount Vernon, and Pottsboro won 55-14 against Bonham. So they are 5-1 and 2-0 in district play. To touch on what Pottsboro did last week, you're talking about getting up 21-7 in the first quarter. And then scoring 4 more touchdowns in the third to really break the game open. It was 28-7 at halftime. And leading the way again, Major McBride, 11 carries, 108 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He also had 3 catches for 109 yards and a score. Halen Flanagan, 18 of 34 passing, 284 yards, 3 touchdowns. Obviously the one to McBride, and then Jude Bentley, 11 catches, 96 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Flanagan also ran 16 times, 63 yards and a touchdown. Reed Thompson, 3 catches for 63 yards. Another super balanced high yardage game for Pottsboro. 291 yards on the ground, 284 yards through the air. So well over 500 yards yet again. Over 50 points again. And we talked about going into that game. Would this be a trap game with Bonham? Bonham hadn't won a district game yet, and if you're Pottsboro, are you looking ahead to this game against Winsboro? And apparently there was good reason to potentially look ahead because we mentioned last week that Winsboro and Mount Vernon were playing each other. Mount Vernon came in as the higher ranked team in the state, and Winsboro was able to come away with that 28-14 win. I think that surprised some people. My understanding is Mount Vernon did have some injury issues in that may have guys that got hurt during the game, and that's football, and that's the way things go, and sometimes that's going to happen. And Mount Vernon was obviously not able to overcome that. So you have Winsboro at 3-0, Pottsboro at 2-0, Mount Vernon and Commerce are both 2-1, and then Rains, Mineola 0-2, Bonham 0-3. So again, this is another district where it looks like we know who the 4 playoff teams are. The question is, what order are they going to be in? And obviously, the winner of this Pottsboro-Winsboro game has the inside track to get the top seed. If it is Winsboro, they basically all but locked up the top spot. As long as they do, even if they were to lose once more, they're going to have the tiebreaker for the top seed over Pottsboro or Mount Vernon. So everything is still in play when you look at the final couple weeks in this district because of all the matchups we still have. But this is obviously huge. Winsboro knows what it means. Pottsboro knows what it means. If you're looking at it, I guess the biggest question is, can the Winsboro defense do to Mount Vernon what it did to Pottsboro? Because like we talked about, we've said it, pretty much every week. You're talking 55 points, 48 points, 50 points, 55 points. The only game that they've really, they haven't scored a ton of points is the loss, which was against Whitesboro. When they had 27. Outside of that, their low is 39. So if you're Pottsboro, you have an offense that can score. But Winsboro has confidence after, I'm sure they're thinking, if we can beat Mount Vernon, then we can beat anybody. So it's going to be interesting. These teams, have been in district the last couple of years. Pottsboro won the first one. Winsboro won last year. So again, if you're Winsboro, you think, hey, we beat these guys last year. But this is a huge game. Much like Whitesboro Brock, in the long run, it may not matter because you may have one go on one side of the bracket, one go on the other side of the bracket. But this is the big battle now that Mount Vernon has lost the game, and who knows, we could potentially have a 3-way tie like we had that crazy one in this district a while ago where everybody was at the top. So, but this is a huge game as well. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested to see. And Winsboro is a team that's ranked. I would imagine, not that these things matter, but if Pottsboro were to win this game, I could see maybe Pottsboro being ranked next week. I also think if Whitesboro beats Brock, I think Whitesboro could be ranked. So we could have both Whitesboro and Pottsboro potentially ranked, replacing Brock and Winsboro in the rankings if they were able to come out with a victory. But again, so at Pottsboro, going to be a really interesting matchup to watch as well. Moving down to the 3A Division II level, you have SNS going to Valley View. SNS is 1-5 and 0-1 in district. They lost the opener last week against Callisburg, 41-16. While Valley View is 2-4, they are also 0-1 in district after they lost 55-0 against Holiday. Obviously, Holiday is the district favorite for the deep runs that they've had, over the last 5 to 10 years. So it's Holiday, Callisburg, and City View who won their openers, and so they're 1-0, and SNS, Henrietta, and Valley View are 0-1. And so obviously this is a big game in this district because you have two teams that really probably can't afford to drop down to 0-2. The winner's going to be in a good spot against Henrietta, potentially to be in that mix to get into the playoffs. Valley View is better. They're not quite there yet. They've got a lot of young talent. And I think they're still trying to figure that out. But you have an SNS team that, again, I feel like it's sort of a broken record sometimes, and that's the way sometimes seasons go. But you have an SNS team that's still kind of struggling to figure some things out. Last week against Callisburg, it's 41-16. They're down 28-7 after at halftime. Brett Stewart does throw for 151 yards and a touchdown. That was a late touchdown after it was 41-9, and it was a 91-yarder, so a lot of the yardage came there. That was to Kevin Sanchez, who had 2 catches for 128 yards. Chase Sloan had the other touchdown. It was a touchdown run. He had 10 carries for 42 yards. But again, like running game, SNS only has 22 carries for 42 yards. And so it's just been a struggle. But again, we talked about in this district, if you can beat 3 teams, you're almost certainly in. And if you can beat 2 teams, you have a chance. And this is one of those teams that I think, SNS has a chance against. They've got to go on the road. And they're going against a team that's coming off, they got beat pretty bad. So maybe they're not feeling so great themselves right now. But it's obviously a key game because, like I said, the loser's going to be 0-2. And if you look at, you have to look at the way the schedules fall. The way the rest of the way. Valley View has City View next week, and so that could be a potential swing game if they win. And SNS has holiday next week, so you may want to just throw that one out the window in terms of how it's going to affect things. But again, like we said, SNS finishes with Henrietta and with City View, and if you get that win over Valley View this week, you don't have to worry about what you do against Holiday. It's going to be what can you do in those last 2 games, and can you get the 3 wins there to get into the playoffs. And so I think that's sort of what you're looking at in this district. Can you get to 3-2, or at the very worst, can you potentially be 2-3 and have the right 2 wins to get in? I think that's obviously what SNS's path to getting into the playoffs is going to be. And so you're going on the road to Valley View Friday. Can you take advantage of a team that's coming off a bad loss? We will see. And that's SNS going to Valley View in 6-3A Division II action. A couple big games in 8-3A Division II. We had some big ones last week, and we got some more good ones this week. The key game this week again involves Gunner. They are hosting the Howe Bulldogs. So you have Gunner at 5-0 and 1-0 after they beat Bells 24-14 in the District 8-3A Division II opener. And Howe also won their district opener. They won 34-3 against Leonard, and they are 5-1 and 1-0. And so obviously the winner of this game stays undefeated in district, and has the upper hand for the district championship. We've talked about Gunner. They went into last week against Bells. They've won 40 district games in a row. I will point out, this is how things work. The last team that beat Gunner in district play was against Howe, 2015. It's the only district loss that Gunner has suffered since 2013 is a loss to Howe. So can Howe do it again? They've done it against everybody except Commerce. A lot of the games have not been close. I thought we talked about going into this game, the Howe Leonard game last week. I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would be a pretty good game. I think you had both teams sitting at 4-1, thinking that they should probably both win. And Howe came out and really took care of business in that one. You holding Leonard to a field goal, barely 200 yards, only 9 first downs. You get 3 interceptions. And you rely on your usual cast of characters. Austin Haley, 17 of 22 passing, 205 yards, touchdown and an interception. He also ran 12 times for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cooper Jones, 6 catches, 87 yards and a touchdown. Also had a short touchdown run. Antoine Rattler, 20 carries, 98 yards, touchdown. And again, here's how just putting behind all the bad stuff. They had gone. They had a 16-game district losing streak, back-to-back 0-7s in their last district, and here they come right out of the gate in this one, get a win. And now you're looking at can you be the team to take down Gunner? We're talking about Gunner last week. Bells did their best. This was a game we talked about last year. 41-14, not very close. But this was a game that was close all the way. Gunner was up 14-7 after The first quarter, it was 17-7 at halftime. Both teams scored a touchdown in the third quarter before going scoreless in the fourth. But Bells could never just find that one extra gear to be able to beat the Tigers. Ivy Hellman led Gunner, 14 carries, 138 yards, and a touchdown. Ashton Bennett added a touchdown run. Preston Tarpley kicked a field goal. Cannon Lemberg, 4 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Walker Overman, 5 of 6 passing for 71 yards. And Gunner was able to get it done. We talked about before, they were pressed by Brock. They were pressed by Bells here. Again, that's good for them because there's a chance that a lot of their games are not going to be in this. And this is going to be the interesting thing is how another team that can prove this is not just a flash in the pan sort of situation where they're winning, the confidence keeps rising. Can they be a dark horse in this region? I think everybody knows about Gunner. Everybody knows about Bells. Teams that have been to the region semifinals the last couple of years is how becoming a dark horse in this region. Is this I think you can make a very strong case that this is the best district in the region, and these teams have a really good chance to show why. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think, obviously anybody that plays Gunner has nothing to lose because no one expects you to win. Until Gunner actually gets beat, obviously people are going to pick Gunner to win. So maybe Bells showed a blueprint to be able to slow them down defensively. I'm sure, you look at the tape against Brock, you look at the tape against Bells to kind of really see how to be able to slow them down just a little bit. But again, this is a huge one because somebody's going to stay undefeated. And the other big matchup in this district is involving Bells. They're hosting Blue Ridge. So Blue Ridge won their opener against Lone Oak. So they're 4-2 and 1-0 after they won 37-6. And of course, Bells lost to Gunner. And we talked about Bells last week. The last 2 seasons, Bells' only losses in district play have been to Gunner. So Gunner's won the district, and Bells has been the number 2 seed the last 2 years. They've beaten everybody else. So if you're Blue Ridge and you want to make a statement and say, hey, here's where we are, they've gotten better as the season's gone along. This is their chance to make a statement. And if you're Bells, you just go back to work and say, hey, we played Gunner just about as good as anybody, and we think we know we're better than everybody else in this district. The Howe Bells game, I think, is going to be a great one when that happens. But if you're Bells, you want to knock Blue Ridge back down into that bottom with Leonard and Lone Oak. You'll be tied with them, and then potentially have them fighting for the third spot. And you'll also be tied with the Gunner Howe loser. So you don't want, if you're Bells, if you were to lose, I still think I think they're still going to the playoffs. They're better than Leonard, they're better than Lone Oak. And in this district, all you have to do is beat the bottom 2 teams, and you're at least going to go to the playoffs. So, but again, it's just interesting from the fact that, if you're Bells, you're coming off that loss. Are you beat up? Obviously it was a physical game. How are you going to bounce back after Blue Ridge had a relatively easy game against the Lone Oak team that hasn't won a game, hasn't had a lot of close games? That's going to be interesting to see. I'm thinking if things play out the way that we think they'll go, you'd have Gunner at 2-0, and then Howe, Blue Ridge, and Bells would all be 1-1, and and then you have the Lone Oak Leonard winner would be 1-1 as well. And then just to kind of look ahead, Bells Howe is next week, and Leonard Blue Ridge is next week. So and unfortunately, Gunner's going to play Lone Oak. So we know how that would go. But those other 2 games, again, 2 weeks in a row, you've got these 2 games that are going to be huge in terms of the potential seeding as we head down the stretch in this district. It's if somebody can knock off Gunner, I think Howe might be the last team to be able to do that. And we'll see what happens there. But if you're Bells, I think you just get back on the winning track. you do what you normally do in this district, which is beat everybody else. I'm sure that's what they're feeling, and the first step towards that is hosting Blue Ridge on Friday night in that 8-3A Division II matchup. Dropping down to 2A for our last 3 games this week. We have an all Grayson County matchup in 6-2A Division I as Whitewright travels to Tom Bean. The rivals, the rivaling neighbors, are both looking to get their first district win after both lost last week, and they're both 2-4 overall. So I don't know what that means in terms of an even matchup, but you have 2-4, 0-1 Whitewright after they lost 25-18 against Nakona. And then you have 2-4 and 0-1 Tom Bean. They lost 55-30 against a Tioga team that we will talk about here in a minute. So right now in the early going, you have Tioga, Nakona, and Alvord as the 1-0 teams, and you have Trenton, Whitewright, and Tom Bean as the 0-1 teams. Starting with Whitewright, so they played Nakona last week. There's an undefeated Nakona team who's now 6-0 and 1-0, and we wondered what did that mean? How good of a team, an undefeated team, was Nakona? And Whitewright played with them. They got Tyler Ball back at quarterback to help get some guys healthy. We talked about that. Coming off the bye, would they have some guys back in some key spots? And this is a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter. Unfortunately, Whitewright comes up a little bit short. Kenneth York, 11 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown run and a touchdown catch from Ball, who was only threw for 39 yards but did have 2 touchdown passes. One was to York, and then another one was to Jackson Evans. And so you're right there. You're able to move the ball on the ground. The only question is, what were you going to do against this undefeated team? You showed you could play with them, and now you have to deal with your rival, Tom Bean. That score is a little bit deceiving because Tioga got up. They scored 18 of those 30 points in the fourth quarter after Tioga had built up a sizable lead through 3 quarters. I guess that's what, 29, like 40, 42, 41 to 12 after 3 quarters. But, we talked about this with Tom Bean after that ruling about them not being able to make the playoffs. How are they going to react? How were they going to play? And you saw in this one, they did not give up. They did not go quietly into the night. Got a big game from DJ Pearson. He had both receiving and rushing. They put him in the backfield at running back for the first time. 13 carries, 123 yards, and 4 touchdowns rushing. And then he had 7 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown catch as well. Branson Ashlock, 12 of 32 passing, 178 yards. Of no, Alex Sanchez, 5 catches for 43 yards. So they made a little bit of a push. And now you're facing a rival team back on the schedule. These guys haven't met since 2017. Obviously, when they were, you had Whitewright up in 3A and Tommy was down in 2A. But they had played every year from 1990 to 2017, so it's good to see this back on the schedule. And as long as they're in the same district, it'll be on the schedule every season. And so again, it's going to be interesting. You have a Whitewright team that does not want to fall to 0-2 to try to stay in this mix for a playoff spot. And again, we're going to see what Tom Bean has. Home game, playing for pride, playing a rival. What are they going to be able to do in terms of what they can do? They put up some good numbers last week. The question is, can the defense sort of rein in Whitewright before things get out of hand in regards to that? But again, it's all local matchup. We always love to see those, especially when they're district games and what they can mean. So will definitely be interesting to see what happens when Tom Bean hosts Whitewright in that 6-2A Division I matchup. And then the other team in that district, Tioga, like we mentioned, they beat Tom Bean 55-30, so they're 4-2 and 1-0 in district play. And Alvord is also 4-2 and 1-0 in district. They started with a 63-28 victory against Trenton. This was a key game last year in this district as the jockeying down the stretch to try to get seeding and who was going to be in the running for a district championship and all that sort of stuff. Alvord won that game 48-15. For Tioga last week, big name with a big game. Jonah Grubbs was the workhorse. 31 carries, 230 yards, 6 touchdowns. Chase Evans, 17 carries, 101 yards, and a touchdown. Austin Norwood throws a touchdown pass to Sam Mott, and that is how you get to 55 points. And we talked about same thing with Tioga. They needed to get healthy. They needed to, they needed that bye as much as anybody. And they still got some guys out. The question is going to be, are they ready to go this week? Do you hold them off to the next week? This is a key game, obviously, if you want to be in the mix for the district championship, maybe not just for the playoffs. I think, like we said, you've only got to win 3 games, and if you're Tioga at this point, you've already beaten one of those 0-1 teams. Can you beat the other 2? But the big thing with them is they have Alvord this week, and then they have Nakona next week. So you're playing the perceived 2 big dogs the next 2 weeks. You'll know where you stand, and you'll also know going into those last 2 weeks against Trenton and against Whitewright, do we have to win both of them to get in? Are we already in? Because obviously if you start 3-0 and your wins are against those 2 teams, now you're talking, can we win the district championship? So that's the path for Tioga there, and it's going to be interesting to see how they respond against Alvord. And it's at home, so that's always a plus as well. This week in the other 6-2A game, and the other game in this district is Nakona at Trenton. I'm interested to see that one because obviously Trenton played. They put up 28 points against Alvord, and Nakona, like we said, Whitewright played them tough, and I still don't know how good Nakona is. That's going to be an interesting score. Not just to watch in general, but also if you're Tioga, because you have Nakona next week, what do they look like against Trenton, as well as what they did against Whitewright, to see how you match up with them next week. So interesting things already in 6-2A after just 1 week there. And then in the last game of the week, you have the Collinsville Pirates going on the road to play Era. This is a 7:00 game, so if you're making the drive out to Era, 7:00 in 8-2A Division II action. Collinsville is 5-1 and 2-0 in district play. Era is 1-6 and 0-3. Era lost last week to Lindsay 34-0. Again, Collinsville has played Lindsay. They won that game 26-0. So if you want to play that score, Collinsville beat Lindsay 26-0, and then Lindsay beat Era 34-0. And Collinsville is coming off a 39-35 win against Celeste. That was a game where, down to the wire, Pirates had to make a comeback. They scored twice late to rally. They were down 35-24. They scored to make it 35-32, and then they end up getting the go-ahead touchdown and were able to hang on 39-35. Logan Jenkins, 18 of 28. Passing for 304 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had 14 carries for 80 yards. Rylan Newman, 11 carries, 47 yards, 2 touchdowns. Carter Scott, 6 catches, 144 yards and a touchdown. Colin Barnes, 4 carries for 94 yards and 2 scores. And Parker Wells was the guy with the game-winning touchdown, the deciding points in the third quarter. To end the third quarter, they actually went scoreless in the fourth quarter, but some big defensive plays in the fourth quarter to keep Collinsville ahead for good. And so they're 2-0, and Santo is 2-0, and I don't think you have to worry about a trap game because Era is not, like we said, they're 1-6 and 0-3. They have, if you want to look at Era, they've been shut out a couple of times, so far in district. They lost to Munster 69-0. They lost to Chico 16-14, and they lost last week to Lindsay 34-0. So in 3 games, they've scored 2 touchdowns. But if you want to worry about a trap game, you certainly can, because Santo and Collinsville play next Friday. That's the big showdown. We talked about Santo beat Munster. They came back to beat them. So what was that going to do to the standings? So the Santo Collinsville winner is going to be alone in first place. Obviously, have the inside track to the district championship. So if you're Collinsville, you don't want to look ahead. And Santo has Lindsay, so that should be a win for them. So you both should win. You should both be 3-0 going into that game next week. Maybe if Collinsville was playing somebody better, you'd be worried about the trap game. You probably still could. But again, Collinsville's playing really well. They to come back and win like they did, that's a good sign. They've won more games than they did last year when they finished 4-6 and just missed the playoffs. And like we said, they're in a spot where kind of like in some of these other districts. So they have Santo next week, which is obviously a huge game, and then they play Munster the week after that. So they have these 2 big games coming up back to back. If you take care of business here, you go to 3-0. You're finishing with Chico. That should be a win. So at the worst, you're 4-2. And you're in the playoffs, and you're probably the 3rd seed, depending on how else things shake out. But things are still set up. They're still set up there for Collinsville. And so this, like I said, you're going on the road. It should be a win. Just don't be looking ahead to that matchup with Santo next week, which is going to be a huge, that'd be a huge matchup. It should be 7-0, 3-0 versus 6-1, 3-0. And again, I'd have to look at it's a bigger district, and I would have to double check, but I don't think the winner clinches a playoff spot, but they all but clinch a playoff spot. So that's another thing you can just kind of get out of the way. But either way, it's gonna be an interesting week for a lot of people. And that's the way it should be as we go down the stretch. We've got a lot of teams in contention. I think you can honestly say there's probably 9 or 10 teams that are in the mix with a week to go, if not more. And how things shake out, I think we could get 9 or 10 teams in the playoffs. I mean, that's a legit talking point at this stretch of the schedule. We've got teams that are state ranked. We've got teams that probably should be state ranked. And things are going really well for a lot of people right now. And so we'll see what happens in week 8. We'll talk about it next week. We'll look ahead to week 9. I mean, I just can't believe it's so crazy to think we're already in the middle of October and the end of the season is around the corner. But things are starting to get really exciting. People will start clinching. Like I said, I don't do the math on a lot this early in district play. I may do it for the podcast next time, because I'll start looking at who can clinch and who needs what to happen on this week. I think I'll do that for the games next Friday, because we'll really start getting into people being able to clinch. But it's that time of year. It's really exciting. Enjoy your game wherever you go this Friday. The weather's starting to cool down, so that's great. So enjoy the games. Be safe out there. Thanks for listening to the podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.